A Joker reference. Moving on from that, every civilization has society. This is not news. These societies are also oftentimes vastly different to each other. This too, I hope, is not news to you. In Warhammer, these societies are naturally all very warlike for one reason or another. Some of them would honestly rather not be at war. The Craftworld Eldar would prefer if people just left them alone, for the most part, and the Dwarfs aren't actually the biggest fans of war. They're just even less a fan of letting bygones be bygones. For one reason or another, even the factions would like nothing more than peace have to prepare for war, because when demon invasions are as regular as the weather, a few stockpiled armories is a smart plan to stay alive. But just about all these societies, even some of the Chaos ones, have things about them that aren't completely awful. There's downtime when they aren't actively stabbing puppies or whatever. There's marketplaces and restaurants and bars and things to do to actually have fun. Even Hive Worlds will at least have a community place where people can be miserable together in the 4 hours a week they aren't working. But the Skaven truly do live in a society. From top to bottom, it is awful. There's not a single aspect of it that isn't evil to the core. And quite frankly, Skaven society shouldn't work. And yet it does. By the skin of its teeth, and it's perpetually in a state of being ready to explode into civil war, but Skaven society just barely works. So today, let's look at what the life in the day of a Skaven is like. From the lowest of Skavenslaves to the highest of Grey Seers, you'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, but at least it's damn funny to look at. But before we begin, might you be hungry? If you aren't now, you will be eventually, and for that I've just the thing. Factor, the sponsor of this video. Factor is the meal delivery service that sends fresh, chef-cooked, and dietitian-approved meals straight to your front door. You know what makes Factor great? A few things, but first and foremost being how convenient and simple it is. There's no prep, there's no cleanup, no cooking time. Put the package in the microwave for 2 minutes, take it out, and enjoy yourself a nice meal. That's it. That's all you have to do to enjoy one of these fine meals. And not only do they have high standards, having banned over 175 ingredients for being used because they didn't make the cut, but they're also good for a healthy, balanced diet. You get veggies with your meals and all the carbs, fats, and what have you that are the perfectly good kind to ensure you're eating healthy. Factor's great for me come that time of day when I remember I should probably eat something. Be that midnight, 5 in the afternoon, or whenever else, they're great when the realization that my body does in fact need food kicks in, but I don't feel like cooking. If you too want to get yourself some high-quality Factor meals, look no further. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code PancreasFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code PancreasFB50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. With Factor, eating has never been easier, so why don't you order yourself some today? Now then, time to kill, murder your neighbor, and steal his valuables. A lot of the lore I have for you today can be found in the old Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay supplement, Children of the Horned Rat, which is probably the single most comprehensive look at what the Skaven get up to. Some of it is likely not quite canon anymore, because for instance, this book is old enough that necromancy wasn't essentially just limited to the vampire counts and tomb kings in some ways, but for the most part it still holds up and it's a fun read regardless. Properly start, let's look at Skaven society as a whole rather than any one class of them, I guess you could call it. There is, above all else, 2 rules you need to keep in mind for the day-to-day life of Skaven society. They are that shit flows downhill, and the attitude for almost every single Skaven in existence is fuck you, got mine. Do you know how you get promoted in Skaven society almost without fault? Kill the person directly above you, and do so in a way that means you can take his stuff. If you want better gear, kill another rat with better gear while he sleeps. If you're an acolyte, be it a scry or tech rat or one to a Grey Seer, kill them and take their badge of office before explaining to their own superiors that they died of a tragic accident and gave you their position right before. Alternatively, explain how they were trying to sabotage the Council of 13 or their own clan's head of state, and you valiantly stopped them. No one cares what actually happened, not truly. They'll keep an eye on you, but that's just what happens for everyone sufficiently within a Skaven higher-up's notice. Rewards are expected to be given out in Skaven society, but these are the barest of scraps at least as often as not. If you save a leader from the treachery of another rat, and again this doesn't need to be actual treachery, you can just lie about it, he'll likely give you a warp token and a slightly sharper sword. All Skaven are incredibly selfish, but part of that is knowing when to pay someone so they don't decide it'd be more economical to just kill you and take your place. The backstabbing cannot be overstated. The average Skaven is involved at least a dozen different betrayals in varying degrees a day. Have you ever read that statistic that you're only like 5 degrees of separation from basically anyone on the planet if you look in the right places? It's like that, only in this case a given Skaven is only ever 5 betrayals away from a council member somewhere being murdered through a massive butterfly effect of backstabbing. There's exactly 2 reasons why they haven't just fallen apart en masse. They breed like rats, as is fitting, and they hate everyone else just barely more than they hate each other. But that barely silly part in itself can't be overstated either. They spend almost all their time fighting each other, because they want more power within the Under Empire's hierarchy before they do anything else. Even when they invade the surface world, unless the Great Horned Rat is physically there to tell them to behave, they'll begin sabotaging each other mid-invasion. Here's the average Skaven invasion. Say they want to take down an Imperial city. The leader announces his grand plan. He then immediately looks to have the most obviously ambitious for his spot Skaven put into positions where they'll die in the fighting. His immediate underlings all seek to sabotage each other, because that will make them look better in front of the leader that's expected to give them some kind of reward, as well as to ensure they'll have more power and loot at the end by virtue of there being less rats to share it with. Their underlings are doing the same thing. Eventually we go down far enough the chain of command where we find the Skaven that don't really have underlings to boss around. In this case, they'll still be kicking Skavenslaves in the ribs for funsies, but they'll also be trying to figure out how to position themselves in the upcoming fighting so all the rats around them die instead. By the time the invasion is underway, we are likely looking at about a fifth of the rats initially involved having died or dying almost immediately, because Skaven view casualties amongst their ranks like we view high scores in an arcade cabinet. Sabotage, assassinations, well, Skavenslaves probably just fall apart sometimes. This goes on until the invasion succeeds or fails. If it succeeds, a new round of backstabbing occurs so that whoever is left standing can take all the credit in front of the Council of 13. If it fails, everyone conjures up an infinite number of reasons as to why it was actually all the other Skaven's fault and why they were only doing what was best for Skavendom, being paragons of virtue. Imagine that scenario, but it's always happening. Shit flows downhill, that part by the way. This is everywhere, perhaps more so than even the backstabbing. You can find my favorite instance of this in the Thanquol books, because those books are peak from start to finish. Let's say a high-ranking rat is chewed out by his superiors. A Grey Seer is admonished by the Council of 13, but for whatever reason, isn't obliterated on the spot. He will then go on to punish his underlings because he feels bad and is angry at the world, but he can't just start slinging spells at the Council. Well, after they get abused, all of his underlings will abuse their underlings to feel better about themselves. This goes all the way to the bottom until we get instances like the Thanquol one, where the Clanrats on the boat Thanquol's using to travel start beating their slaves for explicitly no other reason than to look busy and because they were angry they got yelled at by the guy Thanquol yelled at. This can also just happen because a given rat feels like being an asshole, which is always, but the end result is somewhere down the line an abused little rat man needing to reassert his dominance, and so he starts beating his underlings over the head with a stick. For some more generalities, Skaven society is actually quite religious. Arguably the most religious in all of Warhammer, save for the traditional Chaos gods. And I feel like that's kind of cheating, because having your god only demand worship by you going to war in a wargame setting is religious easy mode. The Horned Rat is an all-encompassing thing, with them giving praise to him at every possible opportunity. Not at all shockingly, this is not done out of true reverence to the Rat God. This is because they fear him, and he more than happily kills them for no reason when he gets the chance. Consequently, all echelons of Skaven society gives him praise. Heresy against the Horned Rat, and this is in fact the proper definition of heresy, which is to go against established dogma, is ruthlessly quelled. Clan Pestilent's entire existence is considered by basically every Skaven outside of it to be incredibly heretical against the Horned Rat. They're just too powerful for anyone to do anything about it. At least not without massive amounts of harm to themselves, which given how selfish the Skaven are, means that barring the Skaven civil wars, there's only the standard amount of sabotage against Clan Pestilence. Their fear of the Horned Rat and respect born of it means that the Skaven also will become genuinely enraged if even something as small as a banner with his image on it is torn down, if only because again they fear what he'll do to them if they don't avenge it. Skaven are also required to go to church once a day, and if they don't, they'll be accused of heresy, atheism, and general treason. Naturally, those all lead to death, because even in Warhammer Fantasy, you cannot escape Prayer Day. The Skaven language, Queekish, is a language of squeaks, growls, and other various noises like that. Even when they speak it as opposed to other languages, they still say words twice and will often frequently jam two words together with the same meaning. Their writing is based on pictograms, because pictures are easier, simpler than alphabets apparently. Although it's not like there's Skaven kindergarten, so maybe that's a good thing. For some last few fun facts before we move on to the tiers of Skaven society, there is an entire segment in the Children of the Horned Rat dedicated to infanticide. If a Skaven clan conquers the burrow of another, it is customary to eat all the youngling Skavens of the defeated clan. The same page also makes mention of how respect is a cornerstone of Skaven culture, which is hilarious to say out loud. Of course, the book really means that sucking up to your leader is customary, not actual respect. While the book mentions that there's undoubtedly at least one Skaven under your feet relatively closely at all times as well, it also says Skaven Blight only has a population of 250,000. Feel free to add a 0 or 2 to that number, I certainly do. And for a nice bit of gross to end off on, Skaven females. They're kept bloated and drugged and exist solely to pump out more Skaven. There is a single line at the end of the segment about them hinting this is at least potentially a ruse, partially, and in one of the Thanquol novels, a rival Skaven has roided up Skaven females as bodyguards. Lovely, truly. Also, do not look up art of female Skaven. Not even because it's going to show you a bunch of disgusting, bloated rat people, it's just an ungodly amount of furry smut. Out of all the races to crank the hog to, you freaks chose the Skaven. Shame on you all. Anyways, let's look at their casts now. Fun fact, did you know that the Skaven, in spite of their incredible racism and general hate for beings that aren't themselves, can actually be incredibly egalitarian? Why, you'll never find a race that treats outsiders as equally as they do their own kind. This is because they treat the slaves of other races and Skaven slaves exactly the same, by throwing them into a meat grinder. And no, that's not always metaphorical. Soylent Green is made out of Skaven. Skaven slaves largely come from either Skaven that have been harshly punished but not killed, runts of the litter that weren't outright butchered for food, and defeated clans that had their members absorbed into the victor. To be clear, all Skaven are mistreated by their superiors, but not only are the superiors of the Skaven slaves everyone, but it's turbocharged for them. This level of the Skaven hierarchy explicitly exists to be used for however long they happen to live, and then turned into food at the best of times. At least the average Clanrat might have a small little nook and cranny he can sleep in at night. At least there's times they aren't being abused by someone above them. Skaven slaves live in a city's slave pens, piled atop each other until some taskmaster or other puts them to work on the next project. Getting the meagerest scraps of food, the best case scenario for them is likely starving to death so they don't die in a more horrific way. A given Skaven slave's only chance of escaping this position is to either steal his fellow slaves' food or outright eat them, and then try and find a Clanrat to then take the position of instead. How bad these rats have it is mind-breaking and how horrific it is, because there's no injustice you can think of that a Skaven slave hasn't been put through. This is either the largest or second largest grouping of Skaven behind Clanrats, depending on how many slaves are being created at a given time, and they perform the bulk of the grunt work that makes the Skaven Empire possible. Across all Skaven settlements, from Skavenblight to the humblest of burrows, you can find massive groups of them farming black corn, rowing boats, running on treadmills to provide electricity, all things that, since they're Skaven, have a life expectancy of about a week tops, and that's if one of the aforementioned tantral spirals doesn't occur and one of their superiors starts gnawing on their legs to calm down after his boss yelled at them. And when it's time for battle, these rats are the first in line to rush down the enemies of Skaven kind. Not because victory gives them a chance at climbing the ranks, not at all. They'll just be sent back to the slave pits when the fighting's done. No, they do so because at least when they start stabbing Empire State troops, there's a chance they won't die. Assuming they'll make it that far is almost laughable though, because Skaven slaves' purpose on the battlefield is mostly just to soak up enemy ranged attacks and tire out enemy infantry if they make it that far up. Another fun fact, Skaven slaves used to not only cost not even 3 points per model during one edition of Warhammer Fantasy, but they were one of, if not the only unit in all of Warhammer that you were allowed to shoot at an enemy unit they were in melee combat with. Yeah, if you missed, you'd shoot them instead, but who gives a shit? They're Skaven slaves. That's why they exist. Various other races can be found alongside Skaven slaves being worked to death as well, with the Skaven having varying preferences of race. They prefer humans, both because they're everywhere and because human flesh is legitimately the Skaven's favorite food as a race. Dwarfs are prized because they're tough and sturdy, though breaking their wills is quite difficult, so they're a rarity. Halflings are usually turned into cattle because they're largely useless compared to people for manual labor. If you're a Skaven that can get his hands on a slave ogre, that's a win or at least a tidy profit if you sell it to Clan Molder, and elves are rarely seen for a variety of reasons. Their life expectancies are typically just as short as the Skaven slaves they work alongside, though sometimes a Skaven may keep a non-Skaven slave around for a bit longer for prestige purposes or to get a specific use out of it. And quite frankly, the conditions are so horrid for them that I imagine a good chunk of Skaven slaves just almost die at random. Drop dead in the middle of whatever because they're starving, or wounded, or infected, or all three. The average day of a Skaven slave likely goes as follows. Wake up by being hit in the face with a whip, and enjoy yourself a nice dusting of gruel that's going to last you the entire day. Hopefully, you can eat the corpse of the nearest slave that's dead for one reason or another. Whatever your assigned task is, you are then forced to it. If you're lucky, this is a task that isn't diving headfirst into an orc wa because your superiors decided that's the best use of your soon-to-end life. Assuming that isn't your task, I hope you enjoyed the next 20 hours of brutal work, which at best is likely broken up by your overseers throwing a carcass or something rotten into your workplace and telling you and your fellows to go nuts. You're eventually herded back to the slave pits, no doubt receiving plenty of scrapes, lashes, and boots up your ass the entire time, and overall, it sucks. It sucks so bad to be a Skaven slave. The only thing that's likely worse is someone whose soul has been devoured by chaos. And to briefly go into Age of Sigmar for a moment, the Skaven somehow managed to top even that. Skaven slaves are used in large parts to dig the tunnels in between the realms the Skaven use for transit. Sometimes, a Skaven just falls out of the tunnel into an infinite realm of nothingness. Maybe they die, maybe they fall for all eternity. I don't know the specifics, but I know it's horrifying. Much like the Dark Eldar, if you find yourself as a non-Skaven about to be enslaved, just end your life. There's a non-zero chance you'll be eaten alive, a massive chance you'll be worked to death, and if you're sold to Clan Moulder, they might fuse you with their furniture, much like the Dark Eldar do. There's no happy ending for Skaven slaves, just death. The closest chance they got was a Skaven slave named Scabicus, who tried to leave a genuine slave revolution. The Council of 13 told his army they'd spare them if they turned him in, whereupon they descended upon him en masse. And the Council killed the rebelling slaves anyways. Such is life in the depths of the Under Empire. Moving up the hierarchy of rats, we come to the Clanrats. Conditions here are still abhorrent, but we've reached the point in Skaven society where a given rat has some modicum of value to the powers that be. Not much value, I can't stress that enough. High-ranking Skaven will kill Clanrats at the drop of a hat. But Clanrats are to be used and abused, as opposed to the use of them being to be abused, if that makes sense. This is the most populated tier of Skaven society, excepting those few moments when there's an influx of Skaven slaves that haven't been worked to death yet. As it turns out, the majority of Clanrats are employed as warriors, although that leftover minority is no doubt still millions of rats worth of laborers. While they don't have to exist in the slave pens, they still live in overcrowded barracks and have to fight for everything they need. The difference to me between these and Skaven slaves largely comes down to specifics. A Clanrat could feasibly do well enough on a given day that at least for a moment, they could fill their basic needs. Maybe they can scrounge up enough warp tokens to afford to stay at one of the various inns that even the Skaven have, and a nice-ish meal of only somewhat rotten meat. Perhaps they can even steal a properly maintained weapon, although the majority of them are still taking rusty spears and swords to the field of battle, which in itself is an improvement over Skaven slaves. The Skaven do in fact have marketplaces and town squares, with the example settlement from Children of the Horned Rat mentioning how they'll frequently have names such as Big Squeak, because of course that's the name of one of these places. Used and abused is the motto, however. Clanrats in fact tend to be the first ones to die when the Skaven are doing some kind of experiment or test, for example. Skaven slaves have a limited number of uses by virtue of them being on the bottom of the barrel. They'll frequently be just desperate enough, for instance, that if handed a new scry or weapon and told to give it a test fire, they may damn well turn it on the creator of it. Clanrats, however, in addition to being a bit better off and therefore healthier and more capable, also have just enough to lose that they'll likely think twice about doing that kind of thing. If they think they can get away with it, then without question they'll try and pull one over on their superiors, but the risk versus reward is a bit more skewed towards risk in this case. Clanrats are the second wave of any Skaven invasion after the slaves have all died, and they're sent into fights that would be at least nice if the Skaven could win, although if they don't, it might not be the end of the invasion or anything like that. If Clanrats are part of the main thrust of the invasion, then they'll likely be seen as a massive tide of rodents swarming over everything in a near numberless horde. They'll fight a bit better, a bit longer, a bit more bravely than Skaven slaves, but much like grunts in Halo, if they see an important enough rat get capped, they'll still run for the hills, or tunnels as it were. It is at least somewhat important to note that this is where the Skaven habit of actually scheming, as opposed to just shivving your neighbor out of the blue, comes into existence. Skaven slaves, by virtue of how low they are, don't really have the opportunity to form a proper scheme, with the exception of maybe trying to organize a slave rebellion. Given that it's a Skaven slave rebellion, that's less of a scheme and more 50 emaciated rats jumping a dude. Clanrats, however, have just enough resources and potentially influence, at least in their given group of rats, that they could organize some kind of plot against a higher-up or rival. These kinds of events happen at all times in the Skaven Under Empire, with thousands of Clanrats dying every day, which are promptly replaced by the thousands born every day. Aside from this, the Clanrats performing labor or doing tasks honestly not that dissimilar from Skaven slaves, just ones that might require a bit of learned knowledge. The Skaven slave runs on the treadmill of the excavators to power them, but Clanrats might be tasked with loading cargo onto the Skaven ships, or hammering out more swords in rusty factories. It's nothing glamorous, but it's the kind of job that's slightly beyond being worked to death in a warpstone mine, and with slightly better rewards and life expectancy. If no Skaven slaves are around, however, Clanrats will promptly be put into the same jobs. Clanrats are not considered worth keeping around beyond the need for a living Skaven to do an act. Just because they're worth more than the rats in chains doesn't mean they're worth a lot. To put it another way, 1 is 10 times as valuable as 0.1. It's still not a terribly large number. It's very important to note the singular exception to this rule, however, Clan Moors. In Clan Mors, and this is something you can assume to be true for the rest of the tiers of Skaven society as well, backstabbing is generally disapproved of unless the leader is completely incompetent, and the Clanrats can expect to have almost decent lives. Certainly by Skaven standards, it might as well be a paradise, because Clan Mors has discovered the secret that a little bit of carrot goes well with the stick. Clanrats of Clan Mors can expect to receive at least basic training fairly regularly, as well as living standards where they won't outright starve to death if they don't plot against their neighbors regularly. This has allowed them to essentially go from nobodies to a contender for becoming the 5th great Skaven clan in fairly short order. And overall, if you for some ungodly reason found yourself as a Skaven, try and make your way to Clan Mors territory as soon as possible. They don't even send conquered Skaven to the Skavenslave pits unless they're treacherous or truly worthless. Here we get to the point that a given Skaven's life has actual, genuine value. Still not much, but the backstabbing goes from at the first conceivable opportunity to after they've done something productive for me first. At this level of Skaven is where you find the various properly trained workers of Skavendom, as much as any Skaven can be said to be properly trained. Merchants, lower tier scryer acolytes, those brave few innkeepers that are probably regularly murdered and replaced by a different one every week. This is where skilled labor can be found amongst the Skaven. As much as Skaven research equipment and general technology does usually explode if you touch it too hard, it does still require all sorts of personnel to create and maintain. If nothing else, the Skaven who creates something usually has an army of underlings they tested on and/or steal the design ideas from. This is the level where that sort of Skaven exists. Able to potentially afford something as luxurious as their own small burrow in some corner of a Skaven city, these Skaven wield a small but noticeable amount of power, at least in day-to-day life. They certainly aren't bringing clans to warfare, but they can afford to send a Clanrat or a dozen to jump you if they think their schemes require it. As a result, not only is this the level that I imagine most average Skaven scheme towards reaching, but this is where the most varied schemes happen. It's the happy middle ground, and please allow me to explain. The higher up you go, the larger things get, as is expected. The Council of 13 aren't hiring a random Clanrat to mug you in an alley, they're sending Deathmaster Snitch after you. Which is spectacular to be sure, but there's something to be said for lower scale scheming and having to get creative with limited resources. On the other hand, at this level a given Skaven can afford something truly spectacular if they work hard towards it and put their all into it. They aren't just gathering fellow poor rats to jump a slightly less poor rat, they have resources, context, and influence to bring to bear, yet at the same time it's not enough where they can just say their name and every Skaven around will bend over backwards out of fear. This is where the most dynamic treachery happens, where planning and resources come into equal part out of necessity. Of course, an important fact about this Skaven is that every single rat wants to climb to the top, so the fellows here would rise above if they can. Viciously fighting to become a member of the Council of 13 is regular, and if they got that far, chances are they seek the day they can become the Emperor of all Skavendom by themselves. Hell, Thanquol once on a power trip said he might one day try to overthrow the Great Horned Rat. Ambition is key to all Skaven, and at this level, that ambition has the potential to be truly grand. Beyond that, the Skaven here are the most likely ones to live something approximating a normal life. Something where they have to pay the bills, take out the trash, that kind of thing. Not quite as domestic as an actual person would have, but this is the closest thing the Skaven have to the middle class by my estimation. The average day for one of these fellows indeed involves clocking into work and dealing with whatever their overlord says it's time to work on. Pestilence might work on a plague, Molder Skaven on some other creature or other, but it's a nice old-fashioned kind of deal in some ways. They clock in their 12 hours at the ball-crushing factory before going home to do whatever the hell. No doubt they concoct all sorts of schemes in their off time, but that's generally just what Skaven do in their downtime. It's how they relax. This is also roughly where you can find the standouts of a given clan. Plague monks and gutter runners, for instance, are about at this level, the stereotypical image of their clans that give them their shtick. Life is still a struggle even for them, but it's a struggle with something to look forward to at the end of the day. That something is paid for in lesser Skaven blood, but that's just their society. The most noticeable type of Skaven in this class are the Storm Vermin. For those unaware, Storm Vermin are the elite infantry of the Skaven. Of course not equal to the elite of other factions, these are nonetheless Skaven who by virtue of being born with black fur are a cut above the rest, given training to accommodate them and turned into the elite forces and bodyguards of any given Skaven army. They do get some resistance from the common Skaven politicking because of this, but to make up for it, they'd have to deal with other Storm Vermin rivals of equal upbringing, as well as being used as disposable pawns in the schemes of higher Skaven. For reference, in Halo the Spartan 3s were used when ODSTs couldn't get a job done, and Spartan 2s couldn't do it without dying. That's where Storm Vermin often lay in the upper echelons of Skaven politics. The Grey Seer needs an important task done, but the survival of the rat doing it is largely irrelevant. This is where we get to the movers and shakers of Skaven society. At the word of a single rat at this level, thousands of lesser ones will mobilize and then die for their betters. For the benefits of this level before anything else, these rats wield great power and can enjoy the benefits such a station brings. Access to breeders, because yes, that is a reward in Skaven society, they're so awful. Warp tokens aplenty, a near-endless supply of minions. Even for the worse-off clans known as slave clans, those who are thralls to a greater one, these Skavens still rule over their underlings even if they do answer to a higher power other than the Council of 13. Politics are an actual thing that happens at this level, not just the Skaven version of politics. Trade deals between clans, the bargaining of massive amounts of slaves, invasions of the surface on at least a localized level. These Skaven wield tremendous power over a localized area, oftentimes quite large areas if they're one of the better off warlord clans. Speaking of, this is as good a type of any to talk about the different kinds of clans. I've spoken before about the 4 great clans of Scryer, Pestilence, Eshin, and Mulder, the ones that are the most powerful by far and influence all the Skaven clans beneath them in some way or other. Clan Moors as well, which as discussed became a contender to become the 5th great clan by virtue of being slightly closer to lawful evil than any other one. Aside from that, however, there are 2 other types of clan: Warlord clan and Thrall or Slave clan. The lore calls them Thrall clans, but let's be honest here, they're slaves to a greater one. Warlord clans are Skaven clans that aren't powerful enough to be great clans, but also aren't under the direct ownership of another clan. This is the average Skaven clan, where all the above tiers of castes, or whoever you want to call them, exist. They oftentimes will have a slightly different culture to the rest of Skavendom, or at least a gimmick. Clan Scurvy, for instance, is exactly what you think something called Clan Scurvy is: pirate rats. At the same time, the influence of the great clans is not only so all-encompassing, but perhaps more importantly, those are the models GW sells, that naturally those kinds of things still show up in Warlord clans. As the average for Skaven clans, Warlord ones can vary in power from strong enough to at least be a speed bump to a great clan, to barely hanging on out, but still technically independent. Believe it or not, alliances are a frequent thing amongst these clans. Alliances of convenience, based on bullying each other where everyone involved is ready to turn on the other at the drop of a hat, but it is still an alliance with treaties and expectations. When the Skaven invade, you'll rarely find the main clan behind it being the only clan involved, as Warlords call upon all the other rats they can through whatever means they can scrounge up. A given Skaven clan will likely have, if nothing else, various Scryer acolytes and Mulder packmasters, provided they have the funds to buy them, because all Skaven want rat ogres and ratling guns in their arsenal. Bribery and blackmail for us is the sign of a corrupt individual, but for the Skaven, that's just another way to acquire resources and manpower. Thrall clans, meanwhile, are those that willingly or not have become direct vassals of a warlord clan, or more often, one of the great clans. These Skaven tend to be the poorest of the bunch by default, because no Skaven would submit to another unless there was no choice in the matter. That said, this does happen willingly fairly often. Becoming a Thrall clan to a greater one affords you some amount of resources and protection, if for no other reason than the new Skaven overlords of the Thrall clan will view you as their stuff, and Skaven like their stuff. Even in these instances, however, I'm still comfortable calling them slave clans. A Thrall clan still has a degree of separation between them and the main one, so a warlord of the greater clan is almost certainly going to bleed the Thrall clan dry in a given battle before deploying their own troops. An example of a Thrall clan would be Clan Septic. Clan Septic, in a rather unusual turn of events for Skaven, see themselves not just as thralls of Clan Pestilence, but as their right-hand men. They, by Skaven standards, throw themselves into battle with incredible fervor, because they fully believe in the cause of the Pestilent Brotherhood. Clan Pestilence naturally loves this, because that means more rats that aren't directly part of Clan Pestilence to soften up an enemy with. Despite this, they somehow keep coming out of these fights alive, so maybe the Horn Rat does have a soft spot for them. Thrall clans in particular have to be especially careful with their politicking. As the underlings of a stronger one, if they're too brazen with gaining power, then there's a high chance their master clan will smash them flat for getting out of line, especially if they outright rebel. In that case, it'll be straight to the Skavenslave pens for any survivors. At the very least, if they have a really good loot haul, their master clan is likely to take almost all of it. Warlord clans, however, have to face not only that kind of problem, as the great clans aren't exactly willing to let a fifth one rise up if they can help it, but also have to be careful with expanding too rapidly. These clans are oftentimes large enough that if a rival Skaven seeks to claim the title of Warlord, he can easily take a chunk of a Warlord's clan's Skaven and resources with him in a civil war which creates another Warlord clan. For these reasons, all the clans have to tread carefully. Or well, they try to. As you're likely aware, the Skaven are also rampagingly incompetent, and most of them aren't Thankful who get away with it by virtue of being funny to their patron god. Sooner or later, greater strife comes to a Skaven clan, and how they handle it decides if it ends up being a Warlord clan, becoming a Thrall clan, or the entire thing being subsumed to another clan's ranks of slaves. Grey Seers are different, however. While they can be the warlord of a clan, such as Seer Lord Kritislik on the Council of 13, most of the time they're independent agents. This would usually be astonishingly stupid in Skaven society, as despite all the backstabbing, being alone means you're open to just normal stabbing by 50 other rats. However, Grey Seers are basically their own class of Skaven. I've just lumped them in with Warlords because they have roughly as much power as one. Grey Seers are Skaven born with grey fur that act as not only the wizards of the Skaven, but as emissaries of the Council of 13 and the prophets of the Horned Rat himself. There's only ever 169 of them at a time, because 13 by 13 is 169. All other Skaven fear them on some level for all of these reasons. The simplest is the wizardry. While Scryer does have their warp magitech, Clan Eshin has sorcerers, and Clan Pestilence has their magical plagues, by and large only Grey Seers are allowed to practice outright magic. Any other Skaven doing it has to be very careful and is more than likely to get caught and killed, which is why Clan Eshin and Pestilence are the only ones to really get away with it by virtue of their power and influence. Scryer, meanwhile, is in a weird middle ground where it's tolerated if only because their weapons are too useful. Got a bit sidetracked there, but because the Grey Seers are the trained mages of Skavendom, all the other rats fear them, because when you piss one off, they might just blow you away on the spot. That happens all the time. Again, go read Thanquol's books, you should do that anyways. At least some of the instances in them of this aren't happening by him, by the way. Few things scare a Skaven more than a Grey Seer's ire for that reason alone, because every single one of them is more than happy to use power word kill on the first rat to bother them. Even if a Skaven covers himself in foolproof magical protective wards and could just ignore a Grey Seer's magic like Marnius Calgar in Space Marine 2, he's not likely to survive the follow-up punishment sent by the Council or the Horned Rat himself for disobeying his prophets. Other Skaven warlords and leaders do of course still sabotage their efforts and occasionally try to see them killed, but for even the lowliest Grey Seer, they have to be far more careful with it. If you see a Grey Rat with horns on his head walking around seemingly without a care in the world, it's probably because he just ass-blasted some dude to Kingdom Come for being uppity, and knows the display has earned him about 5 minutes at least of not needing to fear for his life. That said, all bets are off when it comes to other Grey Seers sabotaging them. It's a constant game of assassinations there as it is for the rest of Skaven society, only this time with the added knowledge that the person trying to kill a Grey Seer is no doubt also a powerful mage. And of course, can't forget about their own apprentices. There's a lot more than just 169 Skaven born with grey fur every year, which is the mark of a future Grey Seer. These rats become apprentices to an existing Grey Seer, aka slaves and servants at the best of times, and whenever a new position opens up, one of them will take on the role. How do you think this position usually opens up, viewer? Did you guess an apprentice kills his master? Cause yeah, that's generally how it goes. Failing that, another Grey Seer might kill an apprentice's master, and then blackmails that apprentice to become a Grey Seer that's under their influence. Or a Grey Seer dies in battle and the apprentice just takes their place. That does admittedly happen plenty often enough. Grey Seers also have to contend with the Council of 13's wrath directly, which of course Thanquol has had to figure out how to survive on plenty of occasions. Just because they're high up doesn't mean that they're invulnerable, but by virtue of being born grey, they have far more access to luxuries, breeders, and power than almost every other Skaven could hope to achieve. As a quick final note, you could argue that the albino guard of the Council of 13 might be at this level. Similar to how Grey Seers are their voice, an albino storm vermin is a personal guard of the Council of 13. Bred and trained to be actually loyal to the Council, these Skaven go through hellish training to become some of the strongest warriors around, protecting the Council as well as Grey Seers in general. They're all mute, they may actually be mutants or just dye their fur white, or maybe it just turns white magically once they become part of the Council Guard. Either way, while they don't hold much political power, they are fairly immune to typical Skaven backstabbing by virtue of being actually well fed and compensated in exchange for guarding the leaders of the Skaven. That's largely why I'm lumping them in at this level, and because one of them showing up means either the Council is interested in you or an important Grey Seer or Warlord has come to town. Mess with them and it will not end well. The true head honchos of Skavendom. These 12 rats dictate what not just a clan, but all Skaven shall do next in their quest to bring about the Great Ascendancy and drown the surface world in rats. You may be wondering why 12 rats are on the council. That's because the Horned Rat himself is technically on the 13th seat. He rarely directly intervenes, but I would still advise you to not sit in his chair. I haven't read any lore about what happens if anyone does, but I assume it's a bad idea. The Warlords and other figures that make up the Council of 13 usually come from powerful clans, but Thrall clans can in fact make it on there, by the politicking of their masters of course. Clan Morbidus, a Thrall clan of Pestilence, has a seat on the Council, essentially ensuring that Pestilence always has at least 2 votes on any matter. The Council of 13 is arranged like a clock around their 13th chair for their god, with the 1st and 12th seats closest to the 13th being the most powerful, and the farthest ones of the 6th and 7th being the least powerful seats. 6-7, 6-7, 6-7, 6-7. The Great Clans, sure enough, have quite the representation here, as does the Grey Seer clan, but others like Clan Wars that are their own thing, by and large, can be found coming and going from the council as old members die. Backstabbing at this level involves sending entire armies of lesser clans after those of another council members because of their influence. It's the kind of thing that might not even qualify as backstabbing technically, just a declaration of war. If not that, then they can orchestrate actually cunning schemes instead of just stabbing someone who isn't looking. The entire backing of Skavendom is at their beck and call, and when they decide to invade, the Skaven come out to play. Even the Thrall clan counselors, who are ultimately a slave to a greater one on the council, have the power to unmake you. Surprisingly for the Skaven, anyone is actually able to openly challenge a council member at any time. All they have to do is touch the black pillar that holds the commandments of the Horned Rat, and challenge an existing member. This is a threefold problem for why it doesn't happen often though. 1. The black pillar is in the center of Skavenflite, so anyone approaching it is likely to be murdered well before they can touch it. 2. The members of the Council of 13 are the strongest, cleverest, most powerful Skaven there are. You are almost certainly not as clever as them, and you definitely aren't as well entrenched and equipped into Skavendom as they are. Most of the time a council member is replaced is either because they achieve the legendary status for a Skaven of dying a natural death, or more likely because other councilors had them killed instead. And problem 3, which is perhaps the hardest problem to overcome, is the black pillar itself. Most of the time a rat touches it, they just blow up. Blowing up tends to be the last thing any Skaven ever wants to do, so even if they could make it to the pillar, few ever actually try. Also fun fact, most of the commandments on the pillar contradict each other. This is entirely on purpose, because the Horned Rat both wants his worshippers to be clever about getting around them, and because he finds it funny watching them squirm. The daily life of a member of the Council of 13 is trying to get the other members discredited so they can be killed later on, followed by attempting to prevent the others from doing the same thing to them. They also like to dabble in sending tens of thousands of rats to their deaths at any given moment for a scheme, an invasion, or because they're in the mood for it. Thanquol will walk in once or twice a month, whereupon they'll make him nearly shit himself before they send him off on a suicide mission he will somehow survive without fault. They'll eventually do whatever actual work needs to be done to further their own clan's goals, head back to their quarters to eat the finest of Skaven food and snort the finest of warpstone, and then retire before doing it all over again the next day. It's a vicious life, but usually the people paying for it are the underlings. I do not mean Skaven courting rituals, because those don't exist. Instead, I mean how they interact with the other races. Obviously everyone hates them and they hate everyone, and it's a lot of knives, but there are some differences between individual groups. I also don't know where to talk specifically about this bit, if not this video, so here it is. Humanity is on a sliding scale of being aware and ready to combat the Skaven. Bretonnia is at the bottom because they suck. This comes directly from the Children of the Horned Rat book, and while it is in universe written by an Imperial, I choose to believe he's right and not being biased at all. Eat shit, Bretonnia, I hate you, please die. The Empire lies in the middle. By and large, the official word is that there's no such thing as the Skaven. Maybe there's just beastmen that happen to look like rats at most. Witch hunters of course know the truth and fight them, and the Empire does have its rat catchers who prowl the sewers as a preventative measure against lesser Skaven incursions. Tylea, meanwhile, is a nation that has the misfortune of being directly next to Skavenblight, and so does not have the luxury of pretending the ratmen don't exist. They fight them tooth and nail and acknowledge their existence, but have largely seen success in fighting them off prior to the end times, where no one won, so I don't count it. Dwarfs are the enemy that Skaven have most fought since the beginning of time, but with both of them living underground. The war has kind of been back and forth. Initially, dwarfs were a difficult foe to face, then the Skaven adapted and began overrunning many holds. Then the dwarfs learned how to properly counter them, which shifted it back in their favor. Then the Skaven invented flamethrowers and chemical warfare, which helped them out. Nowadays, the two races are still in frequent conflict, but not as often as you might think. Most dwarf holds have fallen with many to Skaven control, and the Skaven often find it easier to fight each other than the stout Dowie. Chaos Dwarfs' interactions are limited and oftentimes revolve around slave gathering by both sides, although I would assume at least once in history a Scryer Rat and Chaos Dwarf Demonsmith collaborated on a mad science project. I choose to say and believe this has happened because I like the mental image of the various abominations that could come out of that pairing from hell. Also, a quick unrelated question for you all. Who do you think would create the most monstrous thing given a week? Perturabo, Ikid the medic from Team Fortress 2, or Shockwave? My money's on Shockwave, personally, although the medics would still be the funniest for sure. The Skaven also by and large try to avoid the elves. They can't get into Athel Loren because the ground is alive and hates them, and they can't get to Ulthuan because it's a continent that doubles as a boat. It's very hard to dig a tunnel through the water, it turns out. They do occasionally have dealings with the Dark Elves, since both races are awful slavers, but both sides also betray each other at every chance. The Orcs are probably the most frequently worked with race for the Skaven, although it is noted in Children of the Horned Rat that this usually ends up with the Orcs in question finding out why that's a terrible idea once they're done working together. Goblins are much more wary of the Skaven, being smarter than Orcs and being aware the Skaven are literal rat bastards because of it. There's also the Night Goblins, who also make their home underground and as such frequently come into conflict with the rats. Places like Carrick 8 Peaks are a hotbed of Goblin and Skaven warfare, featuring the dwarfs that occasionally try to reclaim their old home. Ogres just view Skaven as meat, so they aren't worth considering, and the forces of chaos are a bit more varied in opinions, but it of course trends to bad. Everyone knows the Skaven are awful, so no alliance ever lasts. Nurgle gets along with Clan Pestilence alright, but alright is the best case scenario, and there's still plenty of betrayal. That attitude is itself mostly an Age of Sigmar anyways, because of the Grand Alliance system. Slaanesh forces would find them completely distasteful, with the potential exception of a Slaaneshi demon prince that really likes the iPhoney rat video. Hope that sentence ruined someone's day, by the way. Tzeentch probably appreciates the scheming nature of the Skaven, but he's still not gonna work with them. Khorne likely how much bloodshed they create, but he no doubt hates their cowardice. And in general, they do all work together occasionally, but only for the shortest amounts of time. Beastmen are interesting in their relationship, but more in a meta way. In older editions of Warhammer Fantasy, they were essentially just an offshoot, if stable, race of beastmen. They were their own thing, but they were a subtype of beastmen. Kind of like abhumans over in 40k. This was done away with, sometimes made ambiguous, and it seems by the time of Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition it was the case that many who learned of the Skaven thought of them as beastmen, but they aren't. They do have quite a bit in common, it should be said though, as much like the Skaven, the beastmen are savage, disgusting creatures worthy of contempt who live in squalid conditions of might makes right and treachery that you should hate. Oh, and I guessed Grand Cathay for a bit had a Clannish assassin as an advisor, like at the Dragon Emperor. There was briefly a Skaven advising a human nation as an official, legal, known-about advisor. Was Zhao Ming in charge of this? I feel like Zhao Ming was the reason that happened. And that is at least the basics of Skaven society. I wanted to talk about the Ratmen, so I talked about the Ratmen. Stay tuned for the next video where I just talk unscripted about the Skaven after 8 beers. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Skavenslaves to my Skaven Under Empire, toiling away to keep this horrendous monstrosity I have going. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching. For those who celebrate, have a Merry Christmas, have a Happy New Year, and of course, take care out there. The Imperium of Man be like, we are the rightful rulers of the galaxy and the true master species. No, you aren't. The Ratmen are coming.